In this week's edition of Endzone Insights, we'll be looking at some of the biggest questions in college football. Welcome back into Endzone Insights, where you can get the best takes from the next generation of football fans. I am your host, Darius Fitzpatrick, and sorry it's been a while since I last made an episode of college football or a video in general. I went on vacation recently and didn't have a chance to make another episode while I was on vacation, but I'm back now and ready to talk about some college football. Now, college football doesn't start up for close to another 2 more months, or a little bit less than 2 months, and starting positions still have not been filled up yet on rosters. But there's still many things to talk about, and many things that people are still wondering about for the upcoming season. And that is what we shall be answering today. The biggest questions for the college football season. Now, before we get into these questions, I want everyone to know that these are just my predictions for the season, and that I can be completely and totally off on some of these predictions for the season. And some of these predictions, I do hope I'm wrong, and you'll understand later. If you disagree with me, please say something in the comments section. I would love to get some of your input and what you disagree on, what you feel like I could do better, and how you feel about it. I love public input. With all that being said, let's begin. And our first question of the college football season will surround the Indiana Hoosiers and whether they will repeat as national championship winners. Now, as we all know, Indiana won their first natty ever and went undefeated in the process. The first time in school's history to do either one of those things. And it was really fun to see as a fan, knowing that this will be a moment that will be talked about for generations, and I was able to witness it. When I get older, which I don't want to think about yet, people will ask me what it was like to watch some of these, what some people consider to be one of the greatest college football teams of all time from a school that was awful a few years ago. It was truly an incredible season to watch. However, could they do that again? That is the big question. And if I had to point to one thing, I would probably say no, they couldn't. I'm not saying it's impossible for Indiana to win the national championship again. However, I want to remind everyone how hard it is to win 2 national championships in a row. We saw it with Georgia in 2021 and 2022, then Alabama in 2011 and 2012. While that was more recent than most people think, it is harder to win the Natty now more than ever. Teams have to go through multiple games in the new playoff format, more injuries occur, and sometimes too much rest can hurt teams when they play in the playoffs. Indiana's the only team that got an extra bye week that was able to win off of that. So it was already difficult to win a national championship 2 times in a row. Now with the 12-team playoff format, repeating as a national championship winner is harder than ever. But looking at Indiana's roster specifically, as we all know, they lost their Heisman Trophy winning QB, Fernando Mendoza, to the NFL draft. And in return, they got Josh Hoover. Now, I do believe that Josh Hoover is a good QB, and that this was a great fit for him at Indiana. But can he play up to the level of a Heisman Trophy winner? I don't know if he can. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Josh Hoover, but we need to see if he can cut down on his turnovers and play up to the level that Fernando Mendoza had last year. That's not exactly an easy thing to do. They also didn't just lose their starting QB, though, but they lost their 2 starting wide receivers and their starting cornerback to the draft. Now, I'm not saying that they will regress dramatically because of these losses, because they still have most of their coaching staff from last year still. However, last year, everything went essentially perfect for the team. They had no major flaws. It is hard for me to imagine that they can go 2 years in a row with no major flaws on the roster, especially with all the major changes or major players that they lost to the NFL draft. So while I still see Indiana making the college football playoffs and being a contender for the Natty, I don't see them winning it all next year. Now we will move on to our next big question of the day, which is how Lane Kiffin's first year at LSU will look like. As we all know, Lane Kiffin left Ole Miss in a huge storm right before the college football playoff, and he decided not to waste his time once he got to Baton Rouge. He has reportedly spent $40 million in bringing in top end talent to LSU. And that is headlined by one of the best QBs in college football, Sam Levitt, one of the best offensive tackles in Jordan Seaton, and one of the best edge rushers who was with his former team, Ole Miss, named Prince Will Umamielen. Dang, I didn't think I was going to get that right. But anyway, now, when I initially was looking at this question, I thought to myself that LSU probably would not make the college football playoff. But as I kept thinking about it, I thought to myself, why not? They now have some of the best players from all across the country and have two of the best coordinators in the game with Charlie Weiss Jr. and Blake Baker, and a head coach who has proven that he can win in the SEC. I truly do believe that they can make the college football playoffs next year. Now, I don't think they will be able to do much within the playoffs because of the fact it takes multiple years to install everything in a program, along with the unknown factor of Sam Levitt's injury. However, this team that Lane Kiffin has assembled has the most potential of any team in college football and should be able to bring back the fear that people once had in LSU. We'll take a quick break right here, and when we come back, we will discuss whether or not this is the year for Texas or Oregon. Welcome back into Endzone Insights, and as promised, we will be getting into two of the most polarizing teams in college football this season, the Texas Longhorns and the Oregon Ducks. Both teams are the pinnacle of college football and have been looking to be in the Natty for years now, but seem to come up short every year. Now there's been a lot of hype around these teams as many believe they have a good chance to make it this year. And looking at it, I believe that Oregon will finally be able to make it to the national championship game this year, but I don't see it for Texas as of yet. I will start with Texas. Texas, as we all know, has one of the most hyped up QBs in all of college football, Arch Manning. I'm not as high on Arch Manning as many other people are, but I still believe that the way he ended the season last year, he should be one of the best QBs in college football this season and should bring Texas back to the playoffs. And unlike last year, he will have a much more improved running game by getting former ASU running back Raleek Brown and having one of the best wide receiver cores with Ryan Wingo and former Auburn receiver Cam Coleman. For context, Cam Coleman has a very similar skill set to that of Jeremiah Smith, but he has been on a struggling Auburn team, so his skills have been underutilized, making him not as talked about as Jeremiah Smith. Now that he is in a well-organized team like Texas, he should finally be able to have that breakout season that people have predicted him having. So the skill group of Texas should be all in order. However, I have concerns about their offensive line and the defensive changes that they've made. The offensive line last year was atrocious and one of the worst in school's history. It was awful. And so they had to make major changes towards the line during this offseason. However, I am still concerned about how much of an improvement that offensive line will have, specifically within the interior of the offensive line, as most of their changes are within the interior, and I don't like the fact that all of their offensive linemen that they got from the transfer portal were only 3 stars in the portal. I do think that this will be an improved Texas O-line, but I worry about how much of an improvement it will be. What happens when they play Ohio State or Oklahoma with those really good defenses? Will the offensive line be improved to the point where they can hold up against those schools? That's my first concern with Texas. My other concern involves the defensive side of the football, and just worry about the massive changes that they made within the coaching staff. What I mean, and I'm worried that it will hurt them in the end. What I mean by this is Texas fired their DC Pete Kwiatkowski after. Sorry if I messed up that name, but he spent 4 years with the program. Within that time, Texas had one of the most ferocious defenses in the entire country. And while last year was a down year for Texas defense, it was still one of the best in the nation. So when seeing the firing, in my opinion, it just felt like they were trying to find someone to blame for the mess that happened last year, and Pete was that guy. So not only did they lose a well-respected coach who made Texas's defense feared, but they also hired Will Muschamp, which was a skeptical hiring as well, in my opinion. I know some people will tell me he was the DC when Texas went to the Natty. Yeah, that was in 2009. For reference, I was not even a full 1 years old at that point. And this is a what have you done for me recently sport. And recently, Muschamp was retired for a year. He was an analyst for Georgia before that, and a co-defensive coordinator for the Bulldogs in 2021 and 2022. Not the defensive coordinator, a co-DC. While I could see this move working out for the Longhorns, I am seriously concerned about how he will manage such a large position when he hasn't had such a significant role for a team in years. So overall, while I do expect Texas to be a much improved team next year, my concerns for them make it so I don't believe they will make it to the Natty next year, even if it is Arch Manning's final season with the team. Now that I have finished talking about why I believe Texas will make the Natty this year, now I will get into why I believe Oregon will make the Natty this year. Now, I'm a believer in trends, and a recent trend that has been occurring lately has been with Oregon football and where they end up every season. 2 years ago, they were on the brink of the college football playoffs and unfortunately did not make it. A year later, they made it to the college football playoffs, but lost in the quarterfinal round of the playoffs. And a few months ago, they had got into the semifinals of the college football playoffs, one game away from the Natty, and lost in that game. You see where I'm going in this? Each year they get closer and closer to the national championship game, and if this trend were to continue, this year would be the year that they make it to the big game. Now, I know some of you may be wanting some hard proof, and not just some trend that has been shown. Well, guess what? I can give you that as well. Oregon was able to secure their starting QB from last season, who, may I remind you, would have been the second overall pick in last year's NFL draft if he decided to come out. So they have arguably the best QB in all of college football, along with one of the best receiving threats returning in Evan Stewart and DeCorian Moore, who was a standout freshman receiver for the team last year. So they have their QB and wide receiver room looking good, and they have a steady run game from last year returning. Now, on the defensive side of the football, the team still has many of the players that they had from last season, including edge Mateo. I'm sorry if I mess up this name. Ugala, Mateo Ugalagwe. I think that's how you say his name. But anyway, he was supposed to be a first-round pick if he decided to come out in the NFL draft. So that should show how much of an impact he made last year. But they have cornerback Brandon Finley and defensive tackle Umaria Washington, both of which are considered to be the best at their positions in college football. So overall, this team has one of the deepest rosters that Dan Lanning has ever had, and they all have the experience with one another, as most of them played last year with one another for Oregon. This team is perfectly set up to win now. And if I had to pick one team to make the national championship game, I would pick Oregon. The only thing that I think would hold them back this year would be the changes that they've had to the coaching staff, as they lost both coordinators to head coaching jobs. That is the only thing that concerns me with this team. So I know some of you may be wondering, why would I say Oregon would make it, but Texas wouldn't if they both have coaching changes? Well, I will tell you why. It is because I believe in Dan Lanning more than I believe in Steve Sarkisian. I'm not disrespecting Steve Sarkisian, but every year Dan Lanning has improved and improved and improved. And even last year, when Oregon was meant to regress, they made it all the way to the semifinals. Now, Steve Sarkisian, on the other hand, had regressed last year when he was meant to have the all-star team around him and had struggled against top 10 teams in his career. Dan Lanning does not have that sort of struggle against top-tier teams. So overall, I just believe that Dan Lanning can make these coaching changes work. More than I believe that Steve Sarkisian can make these changes work. Not to say that Steve Sarkisian can't make the changes on the defensive side of the ball work. I just believe that Dan Lanning can get more out of these guys than Steve Sarkisian can. Well, we're going to take a quick break right here, and when we come back, we'll finish this episode off in Southern Cal. Welcome back into Endzone Insights, and we will be wrapping up this episode talking about the USC Trojans. USC Trojans, one of my favorite teams in all of college football. A team that I consider to be the only exciting team right now in California at this point in time. A team that finally looks to be on the doorsteps of the college football playoffs. Will they make it though? That is the big question today. And while I really wanted to say yes, USC will make the college football playoffs this year, I have to say no. USC, here's the reason why. I believe that this USC team should be one of the best in college football and should be in competition for the college football playoffs. However, when I look at this schedule, I just see too many good teams. Let's look at some of their hardest games next year. First, I see Oregon, and as I said earlier, I believe Oregon will make the national championship game, so that's a loss right there. Then they go to Washington, which will be a tough game, but I do see them pulling out the win. And then they go to Penn State, which I don't think Penn State is there as of yet, so I will give USC the win there. This is the difficult part, though. They then go to play Ohio State on Halloween Day. I believe Ohio State is better both roster-wise and coaching-wise, so I give them the loss there. Finally, they go to play Indiana at Indiana. And as we all know, Curt Cignetti has never lost a game at home, so I give them a loss there as well. Now, I do think USC will be a better team than last year, both roster-wise and coaching-wise, especially with the addition of Gary Patterson on the defensive side of the ball. However, I think it might be a case of you are better overall team, but your record is still the same. Because last year, their schedule was not that difficult. But this season, it is one of the toughest in all of college football. Now, you could say that USC could upset some of those teams I mentioned, and I could see that happening. But here's the thing. I don't trust Lincoln Riley to beat them. Lincoln Riley is 6-13 against ranked teams at USC, and has lost to teams with rosters that had way less talent than USC. So when I look at those games and you ask me, who do I trust more, Lincoln Riley or Ryan Day or Curt Cignetti or Dan Lanning? I'm not picking Lincoln Riley against any of those other coaches. So I think USC will be a very good team next year, but I don't believe that they will make the college football playoffs next year. And if that happens, then I don't think that Lincoln Riley will be the coach at USC any longer. USC is a school that should be in the college football playoffs every single season. And considering the fact that Lincoln Riley has gotten 5 years to do that and hasn't done it once, it makes it a make or break season for him. He has gotten plenty of time with USC to make a national championship level team, and he hasn't even made the playoffs yet. So if he doesn't make the playoffs, as I'm predicting, I think Lincoln Riley will be out of Southern California. Now, I hope I'm wrong, because I never want anyone to get fired from their jobs. However, at this point in time, I can't ignore the evidence, and I feel that this will more than likely be Lincoln Riley's final season with the USC Trojans. Well, that is going to wrap up this episode of Endzone Insights. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please send it to someone you know. If you feel any differently about some of the things I said, please comment down below and tell me what you believe. I love to get public input on these type of things. When I come back, we will be discussing some hot takes that you, as the fans, have made. But until then, be safe, be happy, and live your best life.